Thursday morning, a memorial service was held at the Pentagon to honor the lives that were lost at the 9/11 terror attacks. Bells were rung as many gathered together. President Donald J. Trump had this to say.
To every member that still feels a void every day of your lives, the First Lady and I unite with you in sorrow. And today, as one nation, we renew our sacred vow that we will never forget September 11th, 2001.
24 years ago, thousands of lives were lost. Families were broken, and a nation was changed forever. For those who witnessed the events firsthand, the impact of that day has carried on for decades. I sat down with longtime journalist Michael Williams, who was on the ground in New York City reporting the tragedy. Michael, thank you so much for sitting down with me and opening your heart on such a prevalent day in American history. Take me back to the atmosphere, the sights, the sounds of September 11th, 2001.
24 years ago, right now, I was in Miami. Of course, the attacks had happened. There were no words to describe how horrified all of us were. And at that point, of course, we didn't know, might Miami be next? They began grounding flights, of course. By late that night, our general manager at my NBC station in Miami said, let's get to New York. So my photographer and I set out Wednesday morning, the day after the attacks, got to New York City sometime early afternoon on Thursday. I will never forget crossing the George Washington Bridge with my photographer, and we both looked south to Lower Manhattan, and all we could see was the smoke rising. And my photographer and I looked at each other, and I remember it so vividly 24 years later, saying that imagery, that gut-wrenching sight is something that will be with us the rest of our lives, knowing what it entailed. The horrendous loss of life, a country that really, on the day of 9/11 and for a long time afterwards, was on its knees. And yet in all of that, as we covered that story for nearly 2 weeks on the ground in New York, saw unbelievable acts of heroism, certainly gut-wrenching cases, one after the other, of people who'd lost so much and were still trying to hold on to hope. Those stories of heroism and hurt and people coming together in circumstances that truly were unimaginable, those stick with you for a lifetime.
You mentioned these stories of heroism, and I'm sure the first responders, not only them, but civilians stepped into that role of being a hero. Can you tell me about that?
A perfect example of that is we were on West Side Highway, and day after day, one of the images that stuck with me, to your point, Delaney, truck after truck rolling by, and an endless cavalcade going there to try and do their part to remove the debris and what was still at that early point a frantic search, hope against hope that they might find survivors, to do their part, to be part of something bigger, to give of their time, to risk their lives, as we would later find, both in terms of the immediacy of the moment and what might happen, and also the health problems that arose. Ordinary Americans from around New York City, the tri-state area there, and from around the country coming together. As for the first responders, day after day, as the footage would come to us, and we would tell their stories, and we would remark day after day about the bravery of the men and women who were doing so much at ground zero to try to help. I have a stand-up I remember doing. Over my shoulder, I could see the skeleton of what had been the World Trade Center. People say, how do you do that? Well, first of all, you're there to help tell their stories and to try and help communities around the nation understand what's going on. I do remember many a live shot. In fact, almost all of them, you'd stand there and you'd just literally have to collect yourself in a very profound way. It was the most difficult story I'd ever covered. But you remind yourself every day, I'm there to cover an enormously, unimaginably tough story. I got to go home. A lot of people live that story to this very day who lost their firefighter or police or other first responder loved ones, who lost them in later years because of the health crises, these sicknesses that occurred because of their work in that toxic environment at Ground Zero. And people who've had to endure that for 24 years now and will endure it for the rest of their lives. I do remember at times sitting there or standing there and saying, what kind of strength is it that allows people to say we'll forge onward and we'll go about trying to recover, to rebuild, to wrap our arms around all those who'd lost everything and all those who then and later would lose so much in the effort to help those who'd been directly impacted, to help the loved ones of those who'd lost their lives at Ground Zero. Those were lessons that I must confess, many times I've been asked about as I've spoken to people over the years, that you always pray for those people. It was one of those things that you wondered how people could be so evil to do what they did, and you marveled and were thankful in your prayers for the people who were so brave to try to help.
What's your advice for today's journalists who may face a similar tragedy?
First, know our history. It's hard to talk with any depth and sense of nuance and place and time, and to connect what has happened with what may happen today or tomorrow. Always remember our heroes. Remember that they didn't get up that day, 9/11, to be heroes. They got up to go be firefighters. They got up to be police officers. In the most profound moment of my reporting life, which was 9/11 coverage, to do what you could to be there to listen and to help tell the stories in a moment where the communities around the nation needed that, and to listen, to deeply, profoundly listen. The story that haunts me, but at the same time always reminds me of the strength of people, is during our entire time there, we'd be going to tell stories. And we always wanted to remember as journalists that our job is to tell stories with fairness and accuracy, but also empathy. You're a human being first. And day after day, we'd have people coming up to us with pictures of their loved ones. And it broke our hearts asking, have you seen my loved one? Or do you know where maybe there's a center where I can find out? And in the overwhelming number of cases, they were not going to find their loved one alive. But to listen to them, to tell their story, to help communities through our coverage put our collective arms around them, to remember that we're humans first, journalists second. And for you who are young journalists moving on, it's that ability to do your work and never lose your heart and soul, and to always do that work with empathy and understanding and a knowledge of what has happened that helps inform your understanding, your context, your coverage of the stories to come.
What does this day mean to you now?
The day means to me that it's always time to remember. And there's power in that remembrance. And if you really think about it, it's why you and I are journalists. Because in small ways and big, we're telling the stories that we think a community needs to always remember, to always think about. And so I think I come away every year when I think about this day, and I talk to friends about it, with an understanding of the humility we must all have in telling the stories of our community. Our loved ones gave their lives, but they gave them so that all of us could move forward. So to always remember them, to celebrate their lives, to celebrate the best of them, to celebrate the best of us, and to humbly remember that we're there and our small roles, but very important ones as journalists, to help tell those stories, to be there to wrap our arms around a community in tragedies big and small, to remember people don't go into a day saying, I'm planning on being a hero that day. They go in it just being human beings like you and me, but somehow they find that strength of character and soul to do the things that we often wonder, would I have the strength to do that? And I think it's always worth saying, let me honor that, let me respect that, let me never forget to tell their stories. To say, this mattered, then, now, always.